Okay, this next section is called State Penitentiary, and it just goes on, and it gets out of State Penitentiary, but it just goes on. So it's going to be all broken up. Anyway, Utah State Penitentiary. From Orson F. Whitney's History of Utah, page 475, I obtained this information. Along with several others, Watson entered. Along with several others, Watson entered the Utah State Penitentiary at Salt Lake City on March 27, 1886. They were taken to the warden's quarters, where they were fed supper of meat and bread and tea, after which they were placed in a room that was 20 feet and 6 inches by 26 feet. After being locked in at 6 p.m. for the night, 54 men were huddled in this room. It was so crowded that some of the men had to sit upon the top bunks before all could sit down. And since there was only one ventilator, the stench from the privy arising with the breath of the men made the place anything but pleasant. Watson kept a diary of every day's events during this confinement in the pen. They are mere statements of the happenings, but it gives a glimpse of his sufferings, his courage, and his faith through it all. Okay. March 27th. Came to the pen, had supper of meat and bread and tea in the warden's quarters, placed in room 3. March 28th. Had beef, bread, and coffee for breakfast, beans and bread for dinner, bread and tea for supper. Had the choir in our room practicing, sang many good hymns, had no services. March 30th. Had beef, potatoes, and coffee for breakfast, soup for dinner, that was hardly fit for the hogs to eat, tea and bread for supper. Brother Cooley was permitted to see his sick child. A guard accompanied him home. April 2nd. The funeral of Brother Cooley's child takes place today. He was not allowed to go to it. Had bread, coffee, beef for breakfast, beef and bread for dinner, tea and bread for supper. Lost my hair and whiskers. April 7th. Received a letter from Emily and answered it. Oh, the joy it brings to the heart to hear from the absent loved ones and learn that they are all well. I try not to think of those I left at home for fear that I should become homesick, yet how anxiously I look for news from them. April 6th. Well, that one before was April 7th, and now this one says April 6th, and then there's a star, asterisk, asterisk. On the 4th, the notarius Agamonter came to take photographs of the prisoners, taking them by ones and twos. The prisoners were told that he had orders to take them, and of course had to submit to it, and were paired off as the guards called them. Brother Grove was paired with a Spaniard, and Brother Penman with an Indian. White of St. George and I were taken together. Watson wrote that Brother Gowan had been taken sick on April 9th with bullous fever. God pity a man sick in this hole. Okay, wait. Okay. All right. When it says Watson wrote that Brother Gowan had been taken sick on April 9th with bullous fever, then the rest of it. Now we're going into quotes. God pity a man sick in this hole. The confusion that unnecessarily arises would drive a sick man crazy, and when you take into consideration the reigning pandemonium that is here most of the time, it disheartens the bravest. And if it was not that I was upheld by a clear conscience, and the feeling that I have acted toward my family and God in a manner that is approved by Him who will judge all, I believe that I would give up in despair. But I know that I shall not suffer without the Father's notice, and praise be to Him forevermore. Okay, unquotes. Here's a picture. Yes, you can see it. And there's some names under it. And ours is this man with the vest on under his jail suit. And this one in this suit, I don't know why he must have just gotten arrested and didn't have time to put on his stuff, or I don't know what. They ran out of stuff. But he's a Lyman. Francis M. Lyman. He's just like a cousin or something of another line that we have. Yeah, because I told you about that Lyman stuff. Yeah, Lorenzo Dow Watson. All tall and handsome there. And then the other guys maybe will need to have those names. I don't know. There they are. And that picture is in Family Search too. Okay. Great. All right, now back. Sunday evening, April 11th, Watson, with some others, was called upon to administer to Brother Gowan. And here's what he says. Oh, how we ought to rejoice and be thankful that we live when the gospel has been restored, and that we know that it is true, and can acknowledge the hand of the Lord in our trials as well as in our blessings. Oh, that my life may be one continual breath of thanksgiving to the giver of heaven and earth, for I know that God lives. April 14th. Brother Gowan is no better today. Oh, this is a miserable place to be sick in. I fear that Brother Gowan will die unless something is done for him more than has been done. The weather is quite damp, about 3 inches of snow having fallen last night. The snow is cold and damp for a sick man, and every time he is obligated to answer the calls of nature, he has to go into the cold, damp privy in the farther corner of the room, and I am satisfied he gets cold every time. He is now delirious. All this morning he has been muttering incoherently, although a more patient man I never saw. Uncomplaining, he lies on his hell-hole away from anyone that could care for him as he should be cared for. Not even his most dear relations would be allowed to see him. The brethren are willing to do all they can, but what can they do? The doctor was in to see him yesterday and said that he would have to be removed to a more comfortable place, but that is the last we heard of it. The treatment that men receive here is making a terrible account, and adding to an already bill that will have to be settled by someone at that great day. O God, great and all wise, whose wisdom is beyond the comprehension of man, how long will the saints have to endure these things? Oh, how long? These things are hard to bear, yet we know that not one hair from the head of one of thy children will fall without thy notice. O help thy weak and erring children, that they may learn thy will and serve thee. Teach me not to complain, but to bear all things in patience, even unto death, uncomplaining for the gospel's sake, rejoicing in the Holy One of Israel, and acknowledging thy hand in all things. This Brother Gowan was finally moved, and his wife allowed to come and stay by his side. They expected him to die momentarily. However, he slowly recovered and regained his health. This same month, Watson writes that the warden wasn't too concerned about the men and how they lived, but he does say, speaking of Brother Gowan, I understand that he has been treated first rate by the warden. We might have a worse man for a warden than Dow. The prisoners generally would rather have him than take chances on getting a worse one. He also mentioned the fact that word was brought to them that a U.S. Marshal by the name of Dyer had been appointed to Utah and that Judge Powers had resigned. From his diary, I learned further that Sundays they usually had church and spent the rest of the day in reading and conversing in quiet tones, so they would not disturb those who were reading or writing. They had a choir consisting of Brother Bowen, Jones, Grant, Keddington, Swain, and Andy Jonah Colored. Colored is not part of his name. He's in parentheses colored. And Gray, and a William Johnson, organist. Watson mentioned that on April 25th, these men brought a large organ into their room and rendered a number of fine pieces. While one was being sung, there is a fountain filled with blood. That's the name of the song. There is a fountain filled with blood, etc. Brother Snow made the remark that if he should die here, he wanted that sung at his funeral. We all expressed a hope that he might not be called upon to lay his life down here. The men sang a lot, and whenever someone had served his term and expected to leave the next day, they would spend the evening before singing, reciting poetry, or performing in any way they could to entertain the others. When Nicholson and Clausen came with pardons for some of the prisoners, a John Emerson was called out along with the others. When he was informed there was a pardon for him, he burst into tears and said, "Gentlemen, I am innocent of that crime for which I have served 6 years." Visitors were never allowed much time with the prisoners. So after Brother Nicholson and Clausen had finished the business concerning pardons for some of the men, they showed themselves upon the wall. As the prisoners leaving came out into the yard, shout after shout rent the air as those staying sent yells of approval and congratulations from their lusty throats. Brother Connolly and White left this morning. I saw upon the wall today Brother W. H. King, Sam King, and Miss Lily King. They evidently could not obtain a pass, so appeared upon the wall to let us know they'd come to visit us. They were allowed no newspapers of any nature, so they knew little of what took place outside the penitentiary unless a paper came wrapped around something sent to one of the prisoners. They were locked up at 6 p.m. and had to retire at 9. In the interval, they occupied themselves with games such as checkers, dominoes, chess, etc., and in reading. In his diary, he states at first he largely occupied himself with conversation because there was so much confusion he found it almost impossible to read. Later he states, I have occupied my time mostly since I have been here with Spanish and learning telegraphy. Sometimes I play at checkers or chess, as we have a number of good players here. The bed bugs are making their appearance even now in large swarms. The food continues about the same. I am afraid that if we have no change, there will be sickness here this summer. There were times when the Reverend of the Protestant Episcopal Church and some of his lady members came to the prison to hold services. The Mormons gave them their polite attention, but were happy when their own brethren came or they held their own services, for they felt they were blessed with the knowledge of the truth and that there was only one true church upon the face of the earth. On visiting days, if it were possible to secure a pass from the marshal, friends came to let the men know that they were thought of. As the time when Thomas Callister and James Doherty brought a few oranges to Watson, Brother King, and Porter Moss. They also slipped a $5 bill into the hand of King and said it was to be divided between the three. It does the heart good and cheers us when we find that our friends remember us and sympathize with us in our troubles. But it causes us to rejoice more when we know that such friendship is not entirely because of the individual that is in trouble, but because they see that we are here because we do not and cannot give up those principles we hold dear, and they desire to help bear a part of the burden that has fallen upon us. April 19th, Reverend Thrall of the Congregational Church came to preach to us yesterday. He is supposed to be a fine preacher, but I thought that it was more of an oratorical display, or a rhetorical and dramatical performance than anything else. Was Christ divine? Was his sermon, proving it from the testimony of his friends and enemies. Wrote a letter to Edgar, Vivian, and Claire. It has been very windy and cold today. We have spent most of the time this evening in songs and recitations. Brother H.B. Smith recited The Sailor Boy's Dream. Red Clausen recited Sheridan's Ride. Abram Cannon, a German piece, and I recited Abu Ben Adam. Brother Goff sang come again tomorrow. And Brother Greenwall, although I am hoary, I am a gentleman still. The boy McGinnis sang the Creole girl on the lake of Pontchartrain. Brother Jos Evans sang or said, I am old. Brother Porcher, he did, Will you love me when I am old? And Brother McCurran, the girl of Bonnie Danmew. Our mail was delivered just before 9 o'clock and we went to bed. April 20th, received a letter from Sarah and Clara. I feel that I am not entirely forgotten. Not only do I have individual friends, as their letters show, but many sympathize with me and mine because they believe that I have acted right and treated my wives in a way that was proved that I am worthy of their confidence and love. The tendrils of their hearts that have been wound around my spirit I could not blast like the tender ivy that clings to the lightning rod that conducts the thunderbolt that shatters it. Thus hopes would have been shattered had I acted as some have and saved my self-punishment. No, my conscience is clear. I rejoice in the God of my salvation, who has given me strength and wisdom sufficient to cause me to do right in this matter. Brother Bergen was taken to town today and tried for unlawful cohabitation on 4 counts in 1 indictment, and 1 count in 1 indictment, 5 in all. Found guilty in all, sentenced to 6 months and $300 cost in each indictment, making 30 months and $1,500 costs. Poor fellow, how I pity him, but I do not pity him as much as I do those who have sent him here. I had rather be in his place, for it will all add to his glory and their shame and damnation. And while I feel sorry in a measure and pity our people who have to suffer, yet I am willing to acknowledge the hand of the Lord in all these matters, and think that the day will come when we will be glad that we were considered worthy to suffer for the gospel and the truths of heaven that have been revealed through the prophets since the world began. Marvelous is the work, and I am anxious that everything shall be as God wills. There I will stop, put in my bookmark, and check that off my to-do list for today. All right, bye.